Story 1, I'm Mark. I live in San Diego, near City Heights, in a crappy one-bedroom apartment above a tire shop. I used to work security at a grocery store, third shift. I'd ride my old GSXR home after work, just before the sun came up, so I could beat the traffic. Last October, around 4:30 a.m., I was maybe 3 blocks from home when a car blew a red light and clipped me. I remember the crunch in my lower back like someone snapping celery, and then I was looking up at the sky, the smell of oil and blood around me, unable to move my legs. I remember a paramedic kneeling over me, saying, "Stay with me," while I tried to ask if my bike was okay. They told me later my spine was broken in 2 places. I had to have a multi-level fusion. They knocked me out in the OR before I even saw the surgeons. But there's a moment I haven't told anyone about. I don't know why I'm even writing this, except I can't sleep, and I need it out of my head. When they were wheeling me into the OR, I wasn't fully under yet. Everything looked blurry, the lights overhead sliding past like slow comets. They stopped me for a second, and I saw 2 men standing in the corner of the OR, near the cabinets where they keep the sterile packs. They weren't in scrubs, and that alone should have made me panic, but I couldn't talk. I just stared. One of them was wearing a brown jacket, the kind you see in old pictures of guys working construction sites in the 60s. He had big hands, calloused, folded in front of him, staring at me with these tired blue eyes. The other guy was thinner, hair combed back, dark flannel shirt, and he had his hand on the other man's shoulder like he was steadying him. The weird part was they weren't saying anything. They just stood there, watching me, and there was something so sad and calm in their faces that made me want to cry. Then the anesthesiologist leaned over me saying, "You're gonna feel sleepy now," and I slipped under. I didn't think much of it at first. I woke up in the ICU, my mother sitting there with her phone in her hand, eyes swollen from crying. She kept saying, "Thank God, thank God." I couldn't talk because of the tube, but I remember her holding my hand so hard my fingers went numb. A couple of weeks later, after they moved me to the rehab floor, my dad came to visit. We don't talk much, but he pulled up a chair and sat there in his work clothes, staring at the linoleum. Out of nowhere, he goes, "I don't know if this is going to sound crazy," and I nodded for him to keep going. He told me that while I was in surgery, he and my mom were down in the cafeteria, the one that's empty at night with those humming refrigerators and flickering lights. They were sitting there in silence, not even eating, when my dad suddenly heard a voice behind him say, "He's going to be all right." He turned around, but no one was there. He told my mom, and she said, "I heard it too, but it was my dad's voice." My dad said, "No, it was my dad." They just sat there, neither of them saying another word until the surgeon came down to tell them I made it through. When my dad told me that, I got cold all over. I'd seen those 2 men in the OR, and the moment he said my dad, I knew. I'd seen them in old family albums when I was a kid, but I hadn't thought of them in years. His father died in a hospital after a stroke before I was born, and my mom's dad died on the operating table during a bypass, both before I was around. I didn't tell my dad that I saw them too. I just nodded, and he patted my leg and left. I don't know why I couldn't say it out loud, but here's the part that's hard to explain, the part that makes my hands shake even writing this. A few nights later, I woke up in the rehab room. It was maybe 2 a.m. The room was dark except for the hallway light bleeding under the door. I couldn't move much because of the brace, but I turned my head toward the chair by the window. They were sitting there, both of them in the same clothes I saw them in that day, sitting quietly, looking out the window. The thin one turned his head toward me and just nodded once, slow. The bigger one had tears in his eyes and he raised his hand like he wanted to wave, but his hand just hovered there in the air. I wanted to call the nurse, but my throat closed up. I could hear the heart monitor beeping faster, faster, like it was going to explode. They didn't say a word. They just looked at me, and I could feel this deep, bone-deep sense that they were waiting for something, like they couldn't leave yet, like they were holding on. Then as suddenly as they were there, they weren't. The chair was empty. The room was the same as before, the same smell of antiseptic and stale air, but it felt wrong, like something was missing. The next morning, the nurse came in to check on me. She asked if I had a bad dream because my heart rate had spiked during the night. I just told her I didn't remember. I got out of that hospital a few weeks later, but I'm not the same. I haven't told my parents. I haven't told my friends. I can't ride anymore, and I don't know if I ever will. But every morning, I get up, and I feel like they're still there. Those two men, watching me, making sure I keep going. Some nights when I'm lying in bed, I think about how they looked at me in that hospital room, and I feel like they're waiting for me to do something, but I don't know what. I don't know if I'm afraid of them or if I miss them, even though I never knew them alive. All I know is, if you think you're alone when you're about to die, you're not. And sometimes when you live, they stick around to see if you make it worth it. That's all I've got. I just needed someone to know. Story 2. I never thought much about ghosts, not until I moved to this small rental outside of Duluth, Minnesota, last winter. I was 34, fresh off a bad breakup, and needed a place cheap enough that I could still save money while working at the paper mill. The landlord, an old guy who smelled like pipe smoke, said the house was sturdy but had character. It was a yellow 2-bedroom with a slanted roof and a basement that was half dirt, half concrete. I didn't care. It was close to work, and the rent was low. The basement had a weird coldness, even with the heating vents open. My laundry machines were down there, and the steps creaked like they were holding in a breath every time I walked on them. The first few days, I'd get this crawling chill across the back of my neck whenever I came up the stairs. It felt like someone standing too close behind me, but when I glanced back, it was just the dim bulb swinging from the ceiling. I had a folding table set up near the dryer where I would sort and fold clothes after work, trying to keep my mind occupied. One Saturday night, around 10:30 p.m., I was down there folding a pile of dark clothes before bed. My phone was playing some podcasts, and I kept losing the signal, getting static bursts, which annoyed me. I remember checking the lint trap on the dryer, and as I turned, I noticed my folding knife wasn't on the table where I left it. That knife was a habit thing for me. I'd used it to open boxes, cut twine, and I always kept it close. It was just there when I set the clothes down, but now it was gone. I checked under the clothes, on the floor, in the laundry basket. Nothing. I even checked the dryer drum, thinking maybe I dropped it inside by accident. I felt my stomach tighten up in a way I hadn't felt since childhood. The basement felt too quiet, like the air itself had thickened. I stood there breathing, hearing the furnace click on upstairs. It was that moment, that single, quiet moment, when I heard it. A soft, high-pitched giggle. It came from under the stairs. It was fast, maybe 2 seconds, but it was so clear it made me step back into the table. I remember saying, "What the hell?" out loud, almost laughing because it sounded so impossible. I told myself it was the pipes, the wind, something, but the giggle had a wetness to it, like a child trying to suppress laughter. I wasn't going to stick around to figure it out. I grabbed my laundry basket, ready to leave everything else, and turned toward the stairs. That's when I saw my folding knife, resting on the second step from the bottom. It was just there, perfectly placed, blade closed, with the tip pointed toward the basement floor. I know I didn't leave it there. I hadn't even walked near the stairs when I came down. I just stared at it, and as I did, the bulb above me started to sway, just slightly, like someone had brushed past it. I should have grabbed the knife and run up the stairs, but I froze, watching the bulb swing. Then it happened again. Another giggle, this time closer, behind me, right behind my left ear. I dropped the laundry basket and bolted up the stairs, leaving the lights on, leaving the clothes, leaving everything. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I was going to puke. I didn't even shut the basement door. I stood in the kitchen, catching my breath, listening, waiting for footsteps or something to come up behind me. Nothing did. I slept on the couch that night with every light in the living room on. I didn't go back into the basement for 3 days. When I finally went back down, in the daylight, everything was as I left it. Clothes scattered, the folding table knocked sideways, and the knife still on that step, like it was waiting for me. I didn't hear the giggle again. I didn't see anything, but every time I went back down there, I could feel it, like someone was watching from under the stairs. Sometimes when I'd reach the last step to go back up, I'd get a cold blast on my neck. So cold, it made my eyes water. A couple of weeks later, I told the old man next door about it while we were both shoveling snow. He was the kind of guy who always wore flannel and smelled like diesel. I didn't expect him to believe me, but when I told him about the giggle, his face went pale. He told me a family had lived in that house in the 80s, and they had a son who used to play hide and seek under the stairs. But he died in an accident. He fell down those same stairs and broke his neck. He said, "Kid used to laugh all the time, even when he was in trouble." Then he just went back to shoveling, like he hadn't just told me something that would keep me up for nights. I moved out when my lease was up that spring. I didn't tell the landlord why. I didn't want to talk about it anymore. But every so often, when I hear a giggle in a store, or when my phone drops a call and I get that crackling static, it all comes back. That cold, the bulb swinging, the knife appearing on the step. I don't know what I experienced exactly. Maybe it was a ghost, or maybe it was something else. All I know is that I will never live in a house with a basement again, and I will never forget the sound of that giggle in the dark. Story 3. I never really bought into ghosts. Not really, even though I grew up in a family that loves telling stories about them. I live in Chicago, and I was 19 when this happened, working part-time at a coffee shop and commuting to community college. I rented a tiny studio in an old brownstone, the kind where you can hear your neighbor sneeze through the wall and the heat pipes bang all night like someone's knocking from inside them. It was January, brutal cold, when I found out my grandma passed. I had an exam the next day, so I didn't go back home to Indiana with my parents. That night, I just wanted to be alone, but I couldn't focus on studying, so I made some ramen and just scrolled on my phone, trying not to think about it. Around midnight, I turned off the light and crawled under the covers, leaving the lamp on my desk on because I didn't feel like being in total darkness that night. That's when I heard the softest tapping on the wall right above my bed. I froze. It wasn't the pipes this time. It was different, like nails gently drumming, too rhythmic to be the building settling. I told myself it was the upstairs neighbor, maybe dropping something, but it didn't stop. It was a steady tap. 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 "Cut it out," I whispered, like an idiot, and turned to face the wall. It stopped. I let out this tiny, shaky laugh, embarrassed by how tense I was, and rolled onto my back. I pulled the blanket tighter around me and closed my eyes, trying to will myself to sleep. I don't know how long I laid there, but the next thing I remember was waking up because it felt like the air in the room changed, like it went heavy, pressing down on me. My eyes popped open, and that's when I saw her, standing at the foot of my bed, not moving, not swaying, just standing there like she was waiting for me to look. It was an old woman, but not quite right, her outline wrong. The light from my lamp didn't seem to fall on her the way it should. She was wearing a faded nightgown, her gray hair hanging around her face, and I swear on everything, I could see her eyes staring straight into me, like she was angry. I couldn't move. I wanted to scream, but my voice was stuck in my throat, and I could hear my heart hammering in my ears. She lifted her hand, and it was shaking, but her eyes never blinked, and she pointed at me, her mouth opening like she was about to say something. "Stop," I whispered, my voice so small I barely heard it. And then, in the weakest, raspiest voice, she said, "You forgot." My blood went cold. I couldn't think. I couldn't even process what was happening. But I remember blinking, and in that split second, she was gone. Just gone. I sat up so fast I almost fell out of bed, gasping. The room empty, the air still heavy like it was filled with static. I ran to the light switch, flipping every light on in the apartment, checking the closet, the bathroom, the corners. Nothing. No one was there. The door was locked, the window was locked, the chain on the door still in place. I ended up calling my mom at 3 in the morning, and when she picked up, I was crying so hard I couldn't get the words out. When I finally did, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Grandma always said she'd come see you if you didn't say goodbye." That's when I remembered I had ignored her last call before she died. I didn't call back. I didn't say goodbye. I stayed up the rest of the night, every light on, sitting on the floor with my back against the wall, the blanket around me shaking. Every creak in the building made me flinch. Every shadow in the corner made me feel like she was still there, watching me. Morning came and nothing else happened, but I moved out a week later. Couldn't stay in that place. I don't care if people think I imagined it or that it was grief or sleep paralysis. I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and I know that whatever that was, it wasn't just in my head. I haven't seen her again since that night, and I don't want to. But sometimes when I turn off the lights at night, I can still feel that heavy air pressing down on me. And I remember the way she pointed, the way her eyes looked at me, the way her voice sounded like gravel scraping against glass. You forgot, and I don't think I'll ever forget again. Story 4. I never told anyone in my family about what happened that night, and I don't think I ever will. I live in Sioux City, Iowa, and back then I was 19, working nights as a nurse's aide in an old converted hospital nursing home out in Sioux Center. It was the kind of place with cold, echoing hallways and thick brick walls that held in the smell of disinfectant. And sometimes, when you stood still, you'd hear things shifting that weren't there. It was around 2 in the morning when it happened. I was sitting at the nurse's station, head down, flipping through the patient charts to stay awake, and trying not to think about the woman who had died a few hours earlier. She'd been slipping in and out all day, mumbling something about the little girl by the sink and asking us to tell her to stop playing around because she'd spill her water. Honestly, I didn't think much of it then. People say weird things at the end. I'd seen it enough already, but I couldn't shake how, about an hour before she died, her glass of water slid right off the counter like someone had pushed it. I remember it clearly because I was the only one who jumped. The nurse with me just shot me a look and said, "Focus on your patient, okay?" In that clipped tone old nurses have when they're tired and don't want to talk about things they've seen too many times. Anyway, the building was dead quiet that night, and I kept checking the clock. The hallway lights were dimmed, and the only noise was the low hum of the exit signs buzzing in the dark. At that spot where the 2 hallways met, we had one of those big circular mirrors on the ceiling so you could see down all the wings from the nurse's station. It's supposed to make you feel safer during rounds, but it always felt like something was watching you back through it. I was half asleep with my chin in my hand when I noticed a flicker of movement in the mirror. I looked up and froze. Down the hallway about 15 yards away was a little girl. She looked around 6, wearing a white sundress, long brown hair hanging in front of her shoulders. She was swaying, dancing in slow circles with her arms slightly out, like little kids do when they're bored, moving in their own world. She didn't look right in the hallway. The place was too old and too empty for a kid to be standing there at 2 in the morning. I stared at her, thinking it was a trick of the lights, waiting for her to blur back into the floor pattern. But she didn't. She kept turning, arms lifting, head tilting, like she was humming to herself. I whispered, "Hello?" But it came out shaky, and she didn't even flinch. I stood up so fast my chair tipped back, slamming into the cabinet behind me. She stopped dancing and just looked at me. Her head tilted too far, the way it does when a kid is trying to see if you're mad at them. But it was too slow, like it hurt her to move. I backed up against the wall, hands up like I was trying to push the air away. I didn't even blink, afraid she'd disappear and reappear closer if I did. She lifted her hand like she was about to wave, but her fingers were curled in a way that looked broken, her arms shaking. I don't know why I did it, but I whispered again, "Are you okay?" And then she smiled. Not a kid's smile. It was too wide, her lips peeling back too far over small, grayish teeth. Her eyes didn't match the smile at all. They were dark, blank, and flat, like looking into a dead TV screen. I felt something cold rush over me, and every hair on my neck stood up. I turned away, pressing my hand to the side of my face to block her out of my vision, and I bolted for the stairwell, the heels of my shoes echoing down the empty hallway. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if she was following me. I found the nurse down on the first floor, checking medication in the supply room. I must have looked like hell because she raised an eyebrow and said, "What's wrong with you?" I was out of breath, shaking, and I told her, "I just saw a little girl upstairs. She was in the hallway dancing, and she looked at me." She closed the medication drawer, sighed, and leaned against the counter like she'd just heard someone complain about a broken TV. "You saw her, huh?" I blinked at her, waiting for her to laugh or tell me I was losing it. She didn't. She just shrugged, looking at the floor. A lot of residents have seen her over the years. Some of us, too. Usually before someone dies, but sometimes after. Don't worry about it. She doesn't hurt anyone. I didn't know what to say to that. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. I realized then that she wasn't going to tell me anything else. She just walked past me, patting my shoulder once, and went back upstairs like it was just another Tuesday night. I didn't go back up alone for the rest of the shift. I sat in the break room, lights on, door open, staring at the clock until the sun started to come up, listening to the old pipes creak and the distant ring of a call light. Nobody was pressing. When my shift ended, I walked out into the morning air, blinking, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it, that it was just my mind playing tricks after the patient had died, after that glass had fallen. But the cold, heavy feeling in my chest wouldn't leave, and I didn't sleep that day, or the next. Story 5. I wasn't even supposed to be home that night. I'm Eddie. I'm from a nowhere corner of Ohio, the kind of street where the only thing moving after 9 p.m. is the wind pushing an empty soda can down the cracked asphalt. I was 23 back then, crashing at my parents' house for a couple weeks after losing my job, trying not to feel like a complete failure while eating cheap microwave dinners in their living room. It was around 2:30 in the morning, and I was in the downstairs bathroom brushing my teeth because I couldn't sleep, thinking about how I'd tell my folks I couldn't cover my car payment again. That's when I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow but heavy, like someone pacing, but not in a restless way. Just steady, back and forth. I wiped the toothpaste off my mouth and opened the bathroom door. The hall was dark except for the glow from the kitchen nightlight. I saw my dad walking toward the kitchen, still in the same ragged Cleveland Browns t-shirt he wears to bed. I didn't think it was weird at first. He sometimes gets up for water at night. "Hey, you good?" I asked, stepping out behind him. He didn't answer, didn't even glance at me, just kept walking like I wasn't there. I remember feeling this weird itch in my chest, like I should call out again, but I didn't. I followed him to the kitchen doorway, watching him open the fridge, then close it without grabbing anything. He turned, walked past me again, straight down the hallway toward the front door. "Dad!" I tried again, louder. Nothing. He unlatched the deadbolt, opened the front door, and stepped outside into the night. It was early fall, cold enough that I could see my breath when I followed him to the porch. We live on a dead-end street with one streetlight that barely lights the sidewalk under the oak tree out front. I saw him sitting there on the edge of the curb, right under that tree, hands on his knees, hunched, staring at the dark across the road. He wasn't blinking. He wasn't moving. I called out again, "Dad? You okay, man?" No reaction. It was too quiet. Even the crickets seemed to cut out when I stepped down onto the sidewalk. I stopped a few feet away, trying to figure out what the hell I was looking at. The way he was sitting looked wrong, like he was too still, his head tilting just slightly, like he was listening to something in the dark across the street that I couldn't hear. I took another step, about to reach out and touch his shoulder. That's when I heard my mom's voice behind me. "Eddie, what are you doing?" I turned around and she was standing in the doorway in her robe, squinting at me. She looked confused, half asleep. "I think Dad's having I don't know. He won't answer me." She shook her head, confused. "What are you talking about? He's in bed." I just stood there, staring at her, the cold air tightening around my ribs. I turned back to look at him, sitting on the curb, still hunched over, still staring across the street, breathing, but not blinking. "Mom, he's right here," I said. She stepped out onto the porch, holding her robe shut, and said, "Ed's in bed, Eddie. Come inside." I was shaking now, actually shaking, because I don't scare easy, but something felt horribly wrong, like I was seeing something I wasn't supposed to see. I turned back toward the sidewalk, and it was empty. He was gone, not walking away, not standing up, gone. There was nothing there but a dark patch on the concrete where the light from the street lamp fell, swaying slightly from the wind, making the shadow of the branches crawl around. I backed up toward the porch, and my mom was saying something, but I couldn't really hear her because my ears were ringing. I pushed past her, running down the hallway to their room, and there he was, my dad, lying on his side, snoring softly, the brown shirt half pulled up over his belly, the blankets kicked down to his ankles. I remember standing there trying to catch my breath, staring at him. I even said it out loud, "Dad?" Just to hear his voice, needing to hear him say something. He snorted, rolled onto his back, and mumbled, "What? What is it?" I didn't answer. I didn't know how. I just stood there, in the doorway, staring at him breathing, while my mom put a hand on my shoulder. I didn't tell them what I saw until weeks later. I still don't think they believed me. I know what I saw, though. I saw him walk out that door. I saw him sit on that sidewalk under that tree, staring at something in the dark, breathing heavy, ignoring me like I wasn't even there. And then he was gone, and he was in bed, and there's no way to explain that. Story 6. I don't really know how to start this, so I'll just tell it straight. I live in a small upstairs unit in Modesto, California, the kind of place where you can hear your neighbors sneeze through the wall. This was 2 years ago when I was working at a gas station at night, so I'd be home during the day, trying to sleep while people mowed lawns and dogs barked in the heat. It was around noon on a Wednesday, and I was crashing at my friend Roxy's place because the AC at mine broke, and I didn't feel like roasting in my bed again. She lived in one of those old duplexes downtown, with a creaky porch and a weird, dusty smell inside. Her boyfriend Brandon was there too, sitting cross-legged on the carpet, messing with his vape while we were half watching one of those judge shows. She had this huge, boxy CRT TV, the kind you have to slam on the side to get the static lines off. And on top of it, she had some tea lights, unlit, dusty, decorative, just sitting there in a little row. We weren't even talking about ghosts or anything weird. We were just talking about how Roxy's neighbor was stealing her Wi-Fi. Brandon was mid-sentence saying, "I told him, bro, if you need it, just ask." And that was when it happened. 2 of those tea lights shot off the top of the TV. Not like they fell. I mean, they shot. One flew to the left and smacked into the far wall, and the other flew to the right, slamming so hard into the door it bounced back and rolled under the couch. All 3 of us jumped. It wasn't a small noise, it was like someone threw them. I remember the sound they made, a crack, then a dull clatter as they hit the floor. My ears were ringing, and Roxy screamed, "What the fuck?" Brandon jumped up, looking around like someone was in the room with us, and I was frozen on the couch, heart hammering. I remember blinking, just staring at the TV, thinking maybe it was static or something, but that didn't make sense. Nothing else moved, just those 2 tea lights. Roxy ran over and picked up the one by the door, her hands shaking. She turned to me and Brandon and said, "You saw that, right? You fucking saw that." Brandon was breathing heavy, trying to act tough, but he was pale. "Dude," he said, "dude, no way." I tried to speak, but I couldn't even form words. I looked at the TV. Nothing was playing anymore. Just a frozen screen where the judge's face was stuck in a blur. The lights on the cable box were flickering like they were struggling to stay on. I felt this heavy coldness in the room. It's hard to explain unless you felt it. Like the air was thicker, pressing against your skin, and everything felt charged, like after you rub your socks on the carpet but everywhere on your body. I couldn't hear the outside anymore. The cars, the birds. It was like we were in a bubble, just the 3 of us in that heavy, cold silence. Then I heard it, a thump from inside the TV. Not the speakers, not the usual CRT pop, but a thump, like something moved inside it, trying to get out. I saw Roxy's eyes widen and Brandon's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Another thump, closer to the screen this time, and I swear to God, I saw the glass ripple for a split second, like someone's hand pressed against it from the inside. It wasn't a reflection, it was like the glass itself bent outward, just for a second, and I saw a shadow move behind it, but there was no light, so there shouldn't have been a shadow. Roxy started crying, backing up, clutching the tea light to her chest. "Make it stop! Make it stop!" she kept saying over and over, her voice getting higher. Brandon reached for the TV, maybe to turn it off, but he stopped with his hand in the air, looking at me. His eyes were shaking, and he whispered, "It's looking at us." I don't know why that broke me, but I stood up so fast I knocked over the fan behind me. I could feel it too, like something was watching us from that TV, like eyes right on my face, inches away, but I couldn't see them. My skin was crawling, and the coldness turned into a sharp, deep chill that settled in my bones. The screen flickered once, and then the judge show came back, but the faces were warped, stretched, their mouths moving, but no sound coming out. Just this high-pitched whining noise, like a dog whistle, but louder, drilling into my ears. Brandon yanked the plug out of the wall, and the screen went black. The whining stopped. The lights on the cable box went out. The room fell dead silent, the kind of silence that makes your heartbeat sound like it's echoing. We stood there staring at the black TV, waiting for it to happen again, but it didn't. The tea light in Roxy's hand was dented, like it had been crushed, but she said she didn't squeeze it. She was just holding it lightly. I didn't see her squeeze it either. Brandon threw a blanket over the TV and said, "We're done. We're done here." His voice was shaking, but he tried to sound calm, like he was in control. He wasn't. We all ended up sitting outside on the porch in the heat, not saying much. Roxy was still crying, wiping her face with the back of her hand. Brandon was vaping so hard he nearly made himself cough. I just kept looking at the door, waiting for something to come through it. It never did. Nothing else happened that day or ever again in that apartment, at least not while I was there. I never went back inside. I grabbed my keys and left, told Roxy I'd call her later, but I didn't. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was something stuck in that old TV, or maybe it was something that was already in the room, using the TV to show itself. Or maybe it was just waiting for the right moment to let us know it was there. But I saw it, I felt it, and it was real. I don't care if anyone believes me, and I don't watch TV alone anymore. Story 7. I was renting a small upstairs room in my aunt's old farmhouse outside of Franklin, Tennessee. It was the kind of place where the floorboards creaked if you breathed too hard, and the cold felt thicker inside than out. I'd moved in because rent was cheap and it was closer to work. I never thought much about the rumors people in town whispered about that place. It was a Wednesday night, and I'd just gotten home from the late shift at the gas station around 1:30 a.m. I locked up, kicked off my boots, and flopped onto the creaky twin bed, scrolling on my phone to wind down. I didn't even bother changing out of my work clothes. I left the small lamp on because the house had a way of swallowing you whole in the dark, and there was something about the silence there that pressed on your chest if you let it. I was about to doze off when the lamp flickered once, twice, and then went out. I sighed, figuring the bulb finally gave up. But then the screen of my phone started glitching, jumping between apps on its own. I tapped the screen, confused, and then it just died, even though it was plugged in. That's when I heard the TV in the living room downstairs turn on. It was loud. I don't remember turning it on before bed, and I knew I'd left it off when I came in. It was so loud that the floor under my feet vibrated. I stood there listening, frozen, trying to place what was on the screen. It wasn't a show or news. It was this high-pitched, distorted screech, like metal grinding, but with a robotic whine mixed in. I crept down the stairs, every step groaning under me. The TV screen was frozen, bright white with these black lines swirling around, almost forming a face that reminded me of that painting, The Scream. It felt like it was looking at me, even though it was just lines and static. I grabbed the remote and tried turning it off, but nothing happened. The volume button didn't work, the power button didn't work, and I felt this sick panic rising in my throat. It was so loud that I wanted to scream just to drown it out. I reached for the power button on the TV itself, pressing it hard, but the noise kept going, shrill and unhuman. I ended up yanking the plug from the wall, and the sound stopped so suddenly it made my ears ring. The house fell dead quiet, and I stood there for a second, breathing hard, feeling the sweat on my neck and back. I tried to tell myself it was just a glitch, an old TV acting up, but I felt watched, like something was in the room with me. I backed up slowly, not taking my eyes off the blank screen, and then ran back upstairs, locking my door behind me. I sat on the edge of my bed listening. The house was so quiet that I could hear the clock ticking in the kitchen downstairs. My heart was finally starting to slow down when I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my door. They were heavy like boots on the old wooden floor, moving slowly toward my room. They stopped right outside my door. I held my breath. My room was so small I could reach the doorknob without getting up, and I held it, ready to twist it if it moved. But it didn't. Whoever or whatever it was just stood there on the other side. I could hear it breathing, like this slow, raspy inhale and exhale, and it made the air in my room feel thin. "Who's there?" I whispered, and my voice sounded too small, like a kid's voice. There was no answer, just that slow breathing, like it was waiting for me to do something. I didn't know what else to do, so I sat there, frozen, for what felt like forever. I tried to convince myself it was the house settling, that maybe it was a draft or the old pipes, but the breathing didn't sound like pipes, and the footsteps weren't the house settling. Then the doorknob moved. It turned just a little, like someone testing it, checking if it was locked. I let out this choke sound, clutching the handle so hard my knuckles hurt, ready to fight whoever it was, even though I didn't want to open that door. It turned again, a little more this time, and then it stopped. The breathing stopped too. I waited, holding my breath, straining to hear, but there was nothing. Just the ticking clock downstairs and the pounding of my own heart. I don't know how long I sat there before I finally let go of the doorknob. I waited for the sun to come up before I even dared to move. When the first light slipped through the grimy window, I finally opened the door. The hallway was empty. The floor looked the same as it always did, with old rugs covering scratches and stains. I checked the entire upstairs, every room, every closet, even though I didn't want to. I went downstairs, checked the locks, checked the windows. Everything was closed, everything was locked, and there was no one there. The TV was still unplugged, the cord coiled on the floor, the screen dark and cold. I didn't plug it back in. I don't think I slept in that room again after that. I started crashing on a friend's couch in town whenever I could, and I moved out a month later. I never told my aunt why, and she didn't ask. Maybe she already knew. People always think they'd be brave in situations like that they'd grab a bat or a knife, open the door, and face whatever it is. But I'm telling you, when you hear something in your house that you can't see, something that breathes and tries your doorknob while you're sitting there in the dark, you don't feel brave. You feel like a scared little kid, praying for daylight. Story 8. I never thought a cheap ghost tour would end with me running for my life. I live in a small upstairs apartment in St. Andrews, Scotland. I'd moved there for my PhD, and I was trying to convince myself to socialize more. So when my boyfriend came up to visit, we signed up for one of those haunted cemetery tours. I'd seen the flyers stuck to lampposts, black and red fonts promising real poltergeist encounters. I just wanted a fun night out, nothing serious. It was cold that night, the kind of wet cold that crawls into your sleeves. We stood with a small group outside Greyfriars, our breath visible in the yellow streetlights. The guide, a woman dressed like she'd just stepped out of a Tim Burton film, kept making jokes about how something might follow you home. She was good at what she did, and we all laughed. But I was already uneasy, even before anything happened. You know that sense you get that someone's behind you when you're alone? It felt like that, except I was surrounded by strangers, and none of them were looking at me. We got to the Covenanters' prison, the locked section of the graveyard they open only for these tours. It's just a cluster of stone-walled enclosures with old iron gates. The guide stopped us in front of a heavy padlocked gate, pulling out a key. "This is the most active spot," she said, turning to us with a too-wide smile. "People get scratched, pushed, sometimes they faint. There's no shame in stepping out." Nobody left. We shuffled inside. I stayed at the back with my boyfriend Martin. We're both tall, so we figured we'd block fewer people's views that way. It was pitch dark, the only light from the guide's lantern. She started telling a story about the Mackenzie poltergeist, a name I'd heard on YouTube before. I tried to pay attention, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was standing right behind me, just outside the lantern glow. I whispered to Martin, "Do you feel weird?" He shrugged. "Little bit." Then it happened. Something yanked my ponytail so hard that my neck snapped back. I nearly fell. I turned around, heart hammering, but there was no one there. We were at the back. Martin grabbed my arm. "Are you okay?" he asked, eyes wide. "I didn't imagine that," I whispered. "No, I saw you jerk back." My palms were sweating. I could still feel where the hair had been pulled, like a lingering, static shock. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone hiding in the shadows. The guide moved us deeper into the enclosure, stopping us in front of a crypt door. She kept talking about people fainting, but I could barely hear her. I could only hear my own breathing. My eyes flicked around, straining in the dark for any movement. Then in front of me, there was a girl in a white jacket. She was with a hen party, already tipsy, laughing too loudly a few minutes before. Suddenly, she snapped around, eyes glassy, and shouted into the dark, "Stop fucking kicking me!" Everyone turned. Her friends started giggling, but I saw the panic on her face. "I'm serious," she yelled, stumbling forward. "I swear someone just kicked me." I could see her body jolt, like an invisible knee hitting the back of her leg. Her friend told her she was being dramatic, but then she let out this short, shocked gasp, and I swear I watched, as a muddy footprint appeared on the back of her white jeans, the shape of toes pressed into the fabric. Martin whispered, "Did you see that?" I couldn't answer. I was shaking. The girl screamed, a raw, terrified sound that cut through the cold air. She turned, spinning around, but there was nothing behind her. Nothing at all. I looked at the footprint, still fresh, wet mud on bright white denim. It looked like a barefoot print, the toes clearly defined, but there was no one around her. No one had touched her. The mud hadn't been there before. I knew because I'd been staring, waiting to see if she was faking it. She started crying, and her friends tried to calm her down, but the fear was spreading. You could feel it, like the cold had turned sharp. The guide's face changed, the practiced smile dropping for a second. "All right, we're leaving," she said, trying to sound calm, but I could hear the edge in her voice. We all turned, heading for the gate. Nobody was laughing anymore. Nobody spoke. I grabbed Martin's hand so tightly my knuckles hurt, and I kept looking back, expecting to see something crawl out of the crypt, something pale and wet dragging itself across the stones. The air felt heavy, pressing against my chest. I could still feel that tug in my hair, like cold fingers had twisted around it. I couldn't stop checking my shoulders, certain something was behind me, breathing against my neck. When we got outside the gates, the girl with the footprint just dropped to the ground, sobbing. Her friends tried to lift her, but she wouldn't stand. I saw the muddy footprint again under the streetlight, clear as day. Martin turned to me, voice low. "We're not coming back here." I couldn't answer him. I felt sick, like I was going to throw up. My legs wouldn't stop shaking. We walked back to our Airbnb in silence, each of us glancing over our shoulders every few steps. That night I left the lights on, sitting upright in bed, hair still tied up because I didn't want to feel it touch my neck. I kept expecting to see muddy footprints appear on the floor or on the white sheets. I kept expecting to feel that yank again. It never happened again. But I still don't know what did that to us. I don't know how that footprint appeared or who yanked my hair. I've tried to tell myself it was just a trick of the dark, a prank, a drunken hallucination. But every time I remember the shape of that footprint appearing on her jeans, I get cold all over. And I'm never stepping back into that cemetery again. Story 9. I was 15 when it happened, and I still don't know what to call it. We'd only been in that house a few months in Chesapeake, Virginia, off a road that cut through miles of woods and scattered Civil War markers you'd barely notice unless you looked. My dad had just made chief, so we moved into this new ranch-style house, all beige siding and shiny appliances. It felt sterile, like a staged home with no history, but the land around it was older than any of us, and I think that mattered more than anyone wanted to admit. It was weirdly cold inside. You'd step in from the August heat, sweating through your shirt, and it would hit you like a freezer, but not in a good way. The cold felt wrong, heavy almost. Mom would laugh it off. She'd say, "The AC works too well," even when it was off, and my dad would just shrug, too tired from work to care. Most days I ignored it. The flickering lights, the doorknobs rattling at random, the garage door shivering like something was bumping it from the inside. My room was the last one down the hallway, past the bathroom and across from the laundry room. It was the coldest spot in the house, but I got used to wrapping myself like a burrito under the covers, pretending it was nothing. Until that one night, I had been playing Madden on my old PS3, trying to drown out that feeling of being watched that came and went. Around midnight, I finally shut it off, letting the screen fade to black, and just lay there listening to the house creak and settle. It was quiet except for the occasional thunk from the garage door when it shifted, which Mom said was the wind, but there was no wind that night. I wasn't fully asleep when I heard it. A single click of the doorknob. I thought it was my dad checking on me, so I called out, "Yeah?" But there was no answer. The door didn't open. I waited looking at the shadow line under the door, but it stayed closed. A few minutes passed. I must have dozed off because I woke up to the doorknob jiggling again, harder this time, like someone was trying to open it quietly, but couldn't get the angle right. I sat up, heart pounding, and called, "Dad?" Nothing. I should have gotten up. I don't know why I didn't. It was like I was frozen, staring at that doorknob in the dim glow from my alarm clock. It kept jiggling softly, then stopped. That's when I felt it. It started at the end of the bed, a dip in the mattress, like a small weight settling down. But it wasn't my cat. She was locked in the laundry room at night because she'd claw at the door. The air got so cold that it hurt to breathe. My toes cramped under the blanket, and I could see my breath, faint but there. The mattress dipped again, closer to my legs like someone was crawling toward me, slow, careful, like it didn't want me to notice. I couldn't move. I was wide awake, eyes burning, trying to scream, but nothing came out. Then whatever it was, it touched me. A hand. I swear to God it was a hand, ice cold, pressing on my ankle over the blanket. It wasn't a light brush, not static, not imagination. It squeezed gently, like testing if I was real, and the cold shot up my leg into my chest and I couldn't breathe. It held on, and I could feel the shape of fingers, the thumb pressing against the bone of my ankle. I remember hearing myself make this broken, gasping sound, like a sob. I tried to kick, but my body wouldn't move. I was stuck, like whatever it was had pinned me in place with that one hand. It was so cold. It hurt. Then it let go. The mattress lifted, the cold rushed out of the room like a sucked-in breath, and the door to the hallway swung open by itself, creaking slow, then stopping. I could move again, and I scrambled out of bed, flipped the lights on, heart slamming so hard I thought I was going to pass out. No one was there. The hallway was empty. The house was dead quiet, and the cold was gone, replaced by the muggy summer heat that hit me so hard I almost puked. I ran to my parents' room and I didn't care how stupid I sounded. I told them shaking that something had touched me, that it was cold, that it was there, and my dad just stared at me like he didn't know what to say. Mom said, "It was a nightmare, honey." But I could see in her eyes she didn't believe what she was saying. I didn't sleep in that room again. I started sleeping on the couch, and after a week of fighting about it, they finally let me move into the spare room near their room. They told me it was just the house settling, just stress, just bad dreams. But I know what I felt. A hand, ice cold, holding me down. It never happened again, but I never felt safe in that house after that. We moved a year later when Dad got new orders, and I didn't even pack my things. I made my parents do it. I wouldn't go back into that room, not even in daylight. People like to say that ghosts are tied to old houses, creaky floors, places with history in the walls. But I'm telling you, it's not about the house, it's about the ground it's sitting on, what's buried there, what's left behind. And sometimes it doesn't care how new your house is. Story 9. I was 17 when this happened, living in a quiet cul-de-sac in South Texas. I shared a small one-story house with my mom and stepdad. Nothing fancy, but it was home. My room was the last door on the right in the hallway. Pink walls my mom painted when we moved in, a single window facing the driveway, and a small wooden crucifix my abuela gave me nailed above the door. That was normal for us. Mexican households always have crosses over the doors. You don't even think twice about it. This was a Friday night, and my mom and stepdad decided to go out to dinner. I remember I was on the old desktop computer playing around on MySpace, waiting for it to hit 9 p.m. so I could call my best friend without burning minutes. I had chips, soda, the usual. Nothing felt off at first. Then out of nowhere, the air in the room got heavy. It's hard to explain, but it felt like the walls moved in, like the air itself was pressing against my chest. I stopped typing and just sat there, staring at the pink wall in front of me, suddenly aware of how quiet it was. I heard the fridge hum, the house creak, then nothing. I can't explain why, but I felt like someone was watching me. I turned around slowly, just to look at my door. That's when I noticed the doorknob twitch. Just a small movement at first. I thought maybe my mom came back for something, but there were no footsteps, no car sounds outside. Then the knob shook again, harder, like someone was trying to twist it open. I stood up, backing away toward the corner near my bed. The knob started to rattle violently, metal clanking against the wood. Then out of nowhere, bang, bang, bang! Someone was pounding on the door, shaking it like they were trying to break it down. I grabbed my phone and dialed my mom with shaking hands. I said, "Mom, someone's here. Someone's trying to get in." She started freaking out, telling me to get out, telling me to call the police. I couldn't even think. I just kept staring at the door while it rattled. It was shaking so hard that the crucifix above it fell, and I watched it hit the floor in slow motion. The little figure of Jesus snapping off and sliding under my bed. The pounding stopped suddenly. It was dead silent, but I could hear breathing, or maybe it was just mine. I saw shadows under the door, pacing back and forth. The crack of light from the hallway would go dark, then light, like something was walking in front of it. "Please stop," I whispered. I didn't know who I was talking to. My mom was yelling in my ear, telling me to leave, but I couldn't move. Then it started again. The pounding, the shaking, harder than before. I could hear the wood cracking, the frame splintering. I dropped the phone, the call still going, and backed toward the window. I looked back once and I swear, I saw the bottom of the door bending inward, like something was pushing it in. That's when I unlocked the window, pulled it open, and shoved the screen out. I didn't even think, I just climbed through, falling onto the driveway below. I scraped my arm, but I didn't care. I got up, backing away on my hands and feet, keeping my eyes on the window. Everything was quiet. There was no breeze, no cars, no dogs barking. Nothing. But I could see my bedroom door through the window, still rattling violently, but there was no sound. It was like watching something on mute. My Tia lived next door, and she came running out with a tire iron in her hand. She told me later she heard me screaming. My cousins were right behind her, but I couldn't look away from the window. I only turned for a second when she grabbed me, asking me what happened. When I looked back, the door was open, just slightly ajar, not moving anymore. I couldn't see inside, just darkness. The police came fast, before my mom even got home. They checked every door and window in the house. Everything was locked from the inside, except for the window I came out of. They checked the attic, the closets, under the beds, the garage. No one was there. Nothing was broken except for the crucifix on my floor, the small figure of Jesus in 2 pieces. My mom was crying, hugging me, asking me what happened. I couldn't even explain it. I didn't see anyone. I didn't hear a voice, but I know someone or something was trying to get into my room. I kept telling them I didn't touch the cross, it just fell, but no one could explain how it broke the way it did. The police left after an hour, saying there was nothing else they could do. My cousins stayed with me in the living room that night, but I couldn't sleep. I just stared at the hallway, waiting to see the shadow again, but it never came back. I wish I could say that I figured out what it was, or that it was just a prank, but I know it wasn't. That feeling in the room, that heaviness, it didn't feel human. It felt like something dark, something that hated me, was on the other side of that door. Story 10. I never really paid much attention to ghost stories before I moved into that rental in Spokane. I was just trying to get by after my divorce, working 2 jobs, and I picked that old single-story house because it was cheap, and they allowed pets without too many questions. I brought my 2 cats, Lucky, who's old and slow, and a younger white one named Cricket, who tears around like a maniac at 3 a.m. It was a quiet street with cracked sidewalks, lined with old maples that dropped so many leaves in fall I gave up raking. The first few nights I was too tired to notice anything weird, but there was this heaviness in the house, like the walls were holding their breath. I shrugged it off as nerves, adjusting to living alone for the first time in years. This happened on a Sunday afternoon in November. It was around 4:30 p.m., that weird gray time of day when the light fades so slowly you barely notice until it's just gone. I was in the kitchen washing dishes, the window fogged up from the warm water on my hands. Lucky had been sleeping on the couch, the way he always does, curled up in a tight ball on that old wool blanket. I saw him out of the corner of my eye, black and low to the ground, weaving around my feet like he does when he wants food, brushing against my ankle. I felt it, that gentle pressure, and I stepped back so I wouldn't trip. My hands were wet, so I shook them off and reached down to give him a quick scratch behind the ears. But there was nothing there. I froze. I didn't move, just stared at the floor where I swore he'd just been. My first thought was, did he move that fast? I wiped my hands on a dish towel and stepped into the living room, calling out, "Lucky, buddy," expecting to see him there. He was still on the couch, curled up, head lifting lazily as he blinked at me, stretching one paw like he'd been asleep for hours. Cricket was nowhere near me either, probably hiding behind the fridge like she always did. My stomach dropped, and for a second I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe a shadow, maybe just me being tired. But it didn't stop there. I went back to the sink, trying to ignore the tight feeling in my chest. I started washing again, letting the water run over the plates, scrubbing them slowly. That's when I heard it. A soft, muffled thump right beside me, on the counter to my right. The sound was unmistakable, like when a cat jumps onto something but tries to land quietly. Then I felt it, a bump against my arm, like a soft headbutt, a cat's head pushing into me for attention. Without thinking, I turned my head to look, expecting to see Lucky perched there. The counter was empty, completely empty. My skin went cold so fast it made me dizzy. The air felt heavy, pressing down on my shoulders, and I could still feel that warmth where it had touched me, like static under my sleeve. I backed away, my hand trembling, still clutching a soapy dish, and I whispered, "Lucky?" Even though I could see the couch from where I stood, and he was still there, still looking at me, completely unaware. His ears weren't even perked up, and he hadn't moved. I stood there, water dripping from the plate, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The room felt wrong, like the air had thickened, like something was watching me, waiting for me to react. I set the plate down in the sink, trying to breathe slowly, telling myself it was just stress, just shadows, just a draft. Then I saw it. In the reflection of the kitchen window, fogged around the edges, there was the shape of a cat sitting on the counter. Small, black, the exact size and shape of Lucky, but the head was cocked to one side like it was studying me. It didn't move, didn't blink, didn't do anything except be there. I spun around and there was nothing. Just an empty counter with a few crumbs and a coffee mug. I turned back to the window and the shape was gone, the fog shifting as if something had moved through it. My chest tightened so hard I thought I was going to pass out. I started talking, out loud, to nobody. Number. "This isn't happening," I said, my voice shaking so bad I barely recognized it. Then from the living room, I heard a cat meow. It wasn't Lucky's old, scratchy meow, and it wasn't Cricket's high-pitched squeak. It was different, deeper, clearer, and closer, as if it was right behind me. I turned so fast I almost slipped on the wet floor, but there was nothing there, just the couch. Lucky lifting his head in confusion, looking toward the hallway as if he'd heard it too. The meow came again, softer, almost like a question. I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were made of concrete, and my eyes started to burn from not blinking. I could feel something in the room with me, something that felt like a cat but wasn't, standing right at my feet staring up at me. I whispered, "What do you want?" before I could stop myself. Nothing answered, but I felt it brush against my ankle one last time, lighter than before, like a breeze, and then it was gone. The air lifted and the kitchen felt normal again, like the moment you wake up from a nightmare and realize you're safe. Except I wasn't sure I was. Lucky jumped down from the couch, moving slow, coming to rub against my leg, the real weight of him grounding me for a second. I fell to my knees, hugging him to my chest, and he purred, not caring about the water or the soap on my hands. I looked over his head, expecting to see that shape in the window again, but it was just my reflection, pale and shaking, staring back at me. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was a ghost of a cat that used to live there, or if it was something else entirely, something pretending to be a cat so I wouldn't be afraid until it was too close. I moved out of that place 3 months later, not because of the ghost cat, I told myself, but because the rent went up. But the real reason was I couldn't stand washing dishes in that kitchen anymore, waiting to feel that bump on my arm again.